too loud. It's too loud. Oh, my friends, welcome back to another video here from the Overkill garage. It is already a bit late, but I'm once again out here in the garage to make a video for you. And tonight we want to talk about the... it has recently moved. The Overkill Solar BMS, or better, the app. We want to have a closer look at the Overkill app. And in one of the recent videos, I already told you that I have swapped from the XiaoXiang app, or whatever you want to call it, to the Overkill Solar app, because it actually talks to the same BMSes. But I think it's a bit nicer to look at, and it's a bit clearer how these settings are structured, and I want to show you what I have found so far. So, first of all, the Overkill Solar app is free to download on Google Play and iOS App Store. And it also automatically updates. If there's a newer version, it automatically updates as all the other apps on your mobile device. Unlike most of the other apps we are using on our mobile devices to connect to Bluetooth, BMSes, active balancers, because they mostly run on Android only, and you need to download the APK file and install it, allow the installation from a third-party supplier, and then install it manually. And if there's a new version, and they actually update their versions regularly, well, you would have no idea unless you frequently check the website or the download source. So hence, I really like the Overkill Solar app now, because it automatically updates if there's a newer version coming out. And the Overkill app doesn't only work with Overkill BMSes, no, it works with all the other BMSes as well. Pretty much the same compatibility as the XiaoXiang app as well. So basically the QUCC BMS, the Ciabatta, the JBD BMS, the Ant BMS, and all other BMSes which are compatible with the XiaoXiang app, they all work with the Overkill Solar app as well. Well, I guess, and here a big thanks to the Overkill Solar team in the United States for making this app available for everyone to use and not locking it down to only work with the Overkill BMSes. Okay, so far the quick intro, let's get right into it. So we will have the logo and a splash screen which says the app requires location data, enables Bluetooth, but Overkill Solar doesn't use this to track your locations. And you click OK on that. And then it starts already scanning for all your available devices. And here we can see the sheer amount of BMSes I have actually running and online here in the Overkill garage. See, it even discovers the AO lithium battery, the Basin 12 volt 100 ampere hour, the 300 ampere hour, because they're all using some kind of Ciabatta BMS anyway. The SFK battery we have built with the Ciabatta BMS, and of course at the top here the Overkill BMS. But it doesn't mean the Overkill is always at the top. It's a random list of all available devices in the range of the app of your mobile phone. And as I said before in the other video, I really like that it doesn't select one of these BMSes randomly and connects to it like the XiaoXiang app does. It really waits for you to have a look around what is available and then select the one you want. So let's go into the Overkill BMS. It's connecting, getting data, waiting, and here we go. We are connected right away. So in starting from the top, we can see it's the Overkill BMS, but we also have this little pen here, this little edit button on the right. Can click on it and can give this BMS a different name. If it's our battery number 3 or battery number 2, we can put this in as name. I called it the Overkill BMS because it's the only one I have, so I don't need to distinguish between other Overkill BMSes I may have, but you can give it any name you want. Right below is the last updated date and timestamp. So if you are a bit further away from the BMS, you can actually see when the data was last updated. And right underneath we have like a battery symbol. You can see we've got 49% state of charge, 52.6 volts, and we have 135.9 ampere hours left out of 280 for this one battery bank. And left and right we have the charge and discharge animation. So at the moment we are discharging the battery with around 3 amps, which is 152 watts at the moment. And these switches left and right we can actually turn off charging and discharging just by tapping on it. And now you can see the alarm underneath. So it means the discharge MOSFETs are turned off now and we are not discharging this battery bank any further. So very straightforward function. Like it. Right underneath we've got the BMS temperatures. And in this BMS, we have 4 temperature sensors, 1 internally and 3 externally. I called one basement because I put the temperature sensor right in the basement of the battery shelf. One sticks in the battery and the other one sticks in the breaker. And you can see the temperatures behind it. And again, you've got this edit pencil symbol behind the name, and you can just rename the temperature sensors to whatever they measure. So it makes it easy to know what's going on. And here in the next section, we can see all our battery cells individually. And in the header of this section, it tells us the cell delta of 4 millivolt across these cells. The min voltage is cell number 6 or 7 changes. And the max is cell number 2 with 3.292 volts. And behind these bars, you can see the balance function, which are turned off at the moment, because we should not balance here at all. Only above 3.4 volts. Better 3.45, 3.5 volts. You can turn on your balancer. You can change this all in the settings. I'll show you in a second. And once the balance function is active, you can see the balance symbol at the end here showing in a yellow color. And it tells you this battery gets now discharged with around 150 milliamps passive balancing. So further down, we've got 2 sections for a little bit of statistics. This is the session values. So since we are connected with this app to the BMS, it gives us a bit of statistics here. But as soon as you disconnect, it resets them all. So this is not like a long-term history it gives you, only for this app session you have right now with the BMS. And you can also reset these values here. And I thought about what is this good for, But if you do some troubleshooting, for example, and you want to know what kind of peak current can I see while discharging or charging the battery, or voltage spikes or something like this, you can actually see these numbers here in this section and do some troubleshooting then. Then further down here, we've got the BMS info. So it's a JBD BMS, firmware version, device name, manufacturer date, and the battery cycles. It counts to 75 with our battery bank down there. And this is now installed for around 9 months. So 75 battery cycles it has counted since then. And down here, the event counts is also something to troubleshoot if the BMS triggers and turns off charging or discharging. For a moment I thought the camera is not on and I'm talking to nothing here. This is again perfect for troubleshooting as well. If the BMS triggers, if there is something occurring, you can see what has actually triggered your BMS to turn off charging or discharging, over temperature, under temperature, over voltage, under voltage, all these kind of things. And again, for troubleshooting purposes, you can also reset this statistic here and then see if it triggers again and what the actual cause of that is. At the bottom here, you have got your menu, so you can go back to devices and it does another scan. And this was something you could not do with the XiaoXiang app either. You always had to shut down the app and then restart and then quickly select the next BMS you want to connect to, while this one gives you all the time all people need to select the right BMS, right? So, okay, we go back in the Overkill BMS. And as you have seen, the order was different now to what we had before. So we are now currently in the home screen here, and we go to the settings tab. And you can see it populates all the data in the background while it reads the information from the BMS. And here at the top, we've got 4 yellow symbols. So we can actually save the configuration of this BMS, which is very handy if you want to test something and you change several parameters at once. And they may not work correctly as you expected, so you want to go back to what you had before. You can just save the configuration before you do the changes and then open the configuration again afterwards. And it loads all the settings again from this file on your mobile phone. So again, very good feature. I like it very much. And on the left, we have a BMS read, so we can tap this button and it reads the information again from the BMS. So this is for if you have made some changes to the settings and you want to cancel all of them, you just click on BMS read and it reads the information again from the BMS without saving your changes to the BMS before. So it just cancels them out. And here on the right, we've got the BMS write button. This is to get all the changes you have made to the settings here into the BMS. As soon as you change one of the parameters, this BMS write button will flash. We will see this in a second. Just to remind you, you have to save these changes back to the BMS. And then we've got several categories here, and I really like this, how they have structured all these settings. While in the XiaoXiang app, you have only one large list with all the settings under each other. And especially if you are new to all of this, it can be very hard to find specific settings, or you lose overview very quickly. While here we have a clear structure what is actually going on. So we've got the cell count at the top, 16 cells in series in my case. Then in the capacity configuration area, total battery capacity 280,000 milliampere hours, and the cycle capacity as well. I put the same value in my case. If you want to cycle your battery only by 80 or 90%, you only put 80 or 90% of your total battery capacity in this cycle capacity, and then the BMS gives you accordingly the percentage and state of charge. Then we've got the cell full voltage. This is when the BMS decides, okay, we are fully charged. This is at 3.45 volts. As you know, this is how far I charge my battery only. And the same at 2.8 volt. The BMS considers the battery as empty then. We've got a cell self-discharge, 0.1%. I have never changed the settings. And then the next 10 values here are to determine the state of charge as per voltage. And as we know, with lithium iron phosphate batteries, this is just not possible. As soon as we go under 3.4 volts, we are entering the flat area of the charge or discharge curve. And voltage is almost the same for 80% of the capacity of this battery. So it's very, very hard to determine the state of charge as per voltage. So they have actually entered these values here to follow the curve then. I'm not 100% sure when the BMS actually uses voltage to determine state of charge, because usually it does a column count. It calculates the amps going in and out of the battery, and then calculates the state of charge of that. So maybe it uses this voltage only as an estimate if the battery is connected for the first time and the BMS didn't have a full charge yet. And further down we come into our all-time favorite, the balancer configuration, right? So I'm starting balancing at 3.45 volts as well with my BMS here, and the delta to balance is 5 millivolts, so everything over 3.45 and with a larger deviation of 5 millivolt, the balancer turns on. The balancer is enabled, we've got this switch on, and it balances only when charging. And now you will say, Andy, hang on. For several months, you're telling us to turn off charge balance in all the BMSs because it doesn't work. It does not balance the battery unless we are charging. And as soon as we hit the absorption voltage of 3.45 volts, the current goes to zero at one stage, and then the balancer would not kick in anymore because there's no current flowing into the battery anymore, right? I have shown you this many times here on the channel. It is actually the case. But the reality looks a bit different though. Because if you charge your battery here on the workbench and use a power supply or any kind of battery chargers, you've got a very constant voltage and amps going into the battery and can charge it to 3.45. Then the current goes down, absorbs, and at some stage it goes to zero, and then the balancer kicks in, right? Unfortunately, the Overkill BMS, the Ciabatta BMS they are using, is not designed for that, and it can only balance while charging, or it can balance while not charging. And even more unfortunate it also stops balancing while it is discharging. And while I told you to turn off this charge balance, this is all good as long as you have a power supply connected and there is no load connected and we do the testing here on the workbench. Charge balance should be turned off then. But in reality, the battery is not sitting at 0 amps in your battery shelf. While the sun is still shining and while you have load connected to your battery, there's always something going on, and the battery is always a bit of cycling, giving energy, taking energy from the solar. There's always current going in and out of the battery a bit, and we almost never have the 0 amp situation then. So in real life, the balancer will never kick in then. And as you know, I have changed the Haltech BMS with the Overkill BMS recently, and I have watched the Overkill BMS working on this battery here to balance it, and it didn't work. It didn't balance anything. Even there was 180, 200 millivolt deviation potentially caused by the Haltech BMS. It didn't balance. The balancer didn't kick in because there was always a few hundred milliamps going in or out of the battery. Sometimes it was at 0 for a few seconds, then the balancer kicked in. But as soon as the load changes, you're taking more energy out of the battery and then the balancer stops working again. So I found it actually more practical to have charge balance turned on in this BMS. So don't take all my words for granted here. The next function is the SW switch circuit enabled. Is this a software switch circuit enabled? I'm not 100% sure what this function is for. It's turned on at the moment because the BMS has a physical button, an on-off button, but it says SW for software, or is this switch circuit enabled? I'm not 100% sure. If you have any information, please leave a comment down below for everyone to learn. Thanks for sharing. Display Celsius is turned on for me, of course, here. I'm not using this imperial stuff there anymore for, you know. And then down here comes my all-time favorite, the protection section. This is all the information about protecting your battery. And it is being displayed in a very easy to read and logical way. Far better than in the XiaoXiang app, where it's only a big long list of all the parameters and you have to find your specific parameter you want to change. This one gives you actually a far better overview of what is going on. So the first one is the charge over temperature, and it turns off your BMS at 45 degrees if one of the 4 temperature sensors reaches 45 degrees, and then the release is at 40 degrees, so it turns everything back on at 40 degrees once it has cooled down. And 2 seconds is the delay, so once it hits 45 degrees, it actually waits for 2 seconds before it turns off your charging circuit, right? Not the whole BMS, just the charging function. So for all these protection values here, you always have a trigger and a release and a time delay to set. And this is all in one line, right? How good is that? So we can see the cell over voltage down here, 3.65 volts. We turn off charging. And if the voltage goes down to 3.6 volts, it turns the charger back on. If you want to change this to a lower value, you just go in here, set this to 3.5 volts, for example, and then here at the top you can see the BMS write button is flashing, so you have to click on that, and now it writes the information back to the BMS, and now we are charging to 3.65. BMS would shut down, and then if the voltage comes down to 3.5 volts, it will allow charging again. And of course you can change several of these parameters at a time and then write the information back at once at the end of your changes you have made. And here the last two are the charge over current and the discharge over current. They are both set to 110 amps. So once we are hitting the 110 amps, it would stay there for 10 seconds. This is our delay at the end. And if we are still having 110 amps or more, it will shut down your charging or discharging accordingly. And then it waits 32 seconds until it turns it back on and tries again if we still have this high load or high charge into the battery. So this is why you have 2 times to set for these 2 values here. And here at the bottom you can also turn on and turn off the temperature sensors if you want to. And once you have made all the changes to the settings and have saved this to the BMS, you can also save the configuration in a file, bottom battery, right? This is our bottom battery. We click OK. And now we have this saved in a file on the mobile device here. And if we have multiple of these BMSs, for example, we can just open another BMS and load this configuration. And we have the same settings across all our BMSs in no time. So open configuration, and there we can see the bottom battery settings. So I'm just deleting this one. I don't need it actually here. So that's a very, very nice feature the XiaoXiang app lags totally off. And then the last and final option in the settings is the calibration. You can calibrate all your 16 battery cells. So if you have a voltage meter and measure your battery cells and you think the BMS is not measuring correctly, you can correct this and override the measurement of the BMS. I never really bothered with that because I think 10-15 millivolt is totally fine with these battery cells. And here at the top you can change this to current as well, and you can calibrate the current the BMS shows you in the app. And also I like this very much. There's a button set idle current to 0. So don't connect anything to your battery, let it idle, just the BMS connected, and then press this button. If your BMS shows a current, even there's nothing connected. So at the top here again, you can select voltage calibration or current calibration. And I think the XiaoXiang app doesn't have any of these functions at all. And these are pretty much all the functions of the Overkill Solar app. So pretty nice. So the final question is, can we actually get rid of the XiaoXiang app now and solely use the Overkill BMS app? Unfortunately not. I'll show you why. So, okay, base and battery, it doesn't matter. I just click on one. Come on, connecting. Okay, so it's not connected to one of the batteries here in the garage. I don't know. And let's have a look in the battery parameter view of this battery. And if we have a look at the XiaoXiang app here, actually it is not too bad either. See, at the top here we've got the overvoltage, we've got the overvoltage release, and we've got the overvoltage release delay. So these are the three settings we have seen in the Overkill app in one row. They are here next to each other, just underneath each other. So it's actually not bad structured either. I think I'm a bit messed up from the Solar BMS where there are so many parameters which don't make sense. But here is actually fairly straightforward. So I want to show you why we cannot get rid of this one here. Because here are some parameters. Where are they? Here. We've got here a whole bunch of parameters which I'm actually not sure what they are for. They're all called hardware overcurrent, hardware short current, hardware over voltage protection. These are a bit different parameters from what we usually use as an over voltage protection. For example, we set 3.65 volts for the cell, and here it shows 3.9, which I would say this is far too high. But why is it called hardware over voltage protection? I'm not 100% sure why this is hardware related. But none of these parameters here are being available in the Overkill app. So I'm not sure if they are actually important here, if you should change them at all, or if you should not touch them because they are hardware related. So, and because we don't change the hardware, we should not change these parameters. I have never done this, but let me know in the comments down below if you have changed any of these parameters and why and what they actually mean. And while we are here in the XiaoXiang app, for maybe the last time for a long time, have a look at this design here, right? We've got the batteries at the bottom, charging, discharging switch there, a few parameters, and at the top this like speedometer, which shows us the amps in and out of the battery. In comparison to the Overkill app, I would say the XiaoXiang app is a bit prettier, but this is just my personal taste, you know. At the end, it doesn't really matter what the design is, as long as the functionality is there and it's easy to operate. So probably forget about all this. Okay guys, I think so far this video from tonight showing you the parameters and settings of the Overkill app for the Overkill BMS, but also for the QUCC and the JBD and other BMSes which using the XiaoXiang app. 100% compatible with all the other BMSes as well. I think it's just a bit easier to see all the parameters, a bit more structured. As always, I link this all down below under the video here in the description. If you want to have a look at the Overkill BMS and also the app, this is all linked down below. Okay guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all your amazing support here on the channel. And until the next video, you stay charged, stay safe, and thanks again for watching. See you then. Bye bye. I think it's not as pretty as this one. Even it has dark mode by default, but this looks a bit more appealing for me. Maybe I'm just used to the XiaoXiang app because we have used it for so long. I don't know.